So thank you again for coming this morning. This Dharma time is dedicated to looking at how we live the yogic life. And I'll cover things like dinacharya, the koshas, the concept of stitau, sukham and sthiram, and what it means to practice shraddha. So those right now are Sanskrit words that you may or may not be familiar with, but we're going to sit in quiet for a few minutes to start. So just as the bell goes to silence, we're going to aim our minds in that direction as well. You may choose to close your eyes or just to quietly gaze down so your eyes won't distract you so much. As we sit in quiet, I do invite you to release the events of morning and the events that are yet to come on this day, and to rest your attention in your heart, where you have a sense of the quality of life that you'd like to live. You notice that your mind wanders back to planning or reviewing, back to events to come today or events that have already happened. Just quietly bring your mind back to rest in your heart with a sense of the quality or the qualities that you'd like to live in your life. And having rested attention for a few minutes, consider now one of those qualities. Maybe it's you'd like to live your life with compassion or with a measure of elegance or equanimity. Or maybe an authentic life or a life of service. With whatever came for you, choose one to focus on for the next few minutes. And I'd like you to imagine that quality infusing not just your heart now, but your mind, your muscles, and your bones. And from the inside out, that quality infusing your thoughts, your behaviors, your actions, your relationships. So let's begin with that quality infusing your heart and the nearby areas in the chest, your lungs, your ribs, the muscles of the shoulders, the upper back. Imagine that quality infusing the abdomen and the organs of vitality. Those are the organs that keep you healthy and vital day to day. Visualize what might it be like if this quality were to infuse your heart, your lungs, the stomach, the spleen, the pancreas, the muscles of the abdomen, the chest, your shoulder blades, and if this quality were to infuse itself through your arms, your legs, the organs of action, hands and feet, visualize what it might be like if this quality were to infuse your senses from the inside out, so that how you see and hear from within is infused with this particular quality, with a certain orientation. Imagine this quality infusing all 5 senses and flowing outwards then through the other organs of action, which include speech. And then into your relationships and your community. How might this shape your life if it were to flow outwards in these realms? And with a sense of the possibility if each person in the room were to live from that heart quality, let's appreciate for a moment by bringing the hands together in the Anjali Mudra. And with your exhale, you may bow your head to your heart. Release your hands and open your eyes. So just a question, your response will help me to understand how your brain works or how your capacity for visualizing is working right now. Can you actually sense a quality in the heart? It might or might not have a word that goes with it, but do you sense something occurring there that's visceral? You're saying yes. And when I suggest that it could flow outwards to infuse the lungs, the other organs, do you have an image of what that is, even if it's a cartoon image? It doesn't have to be textbook image. You're saying no, and others are saying yes. Okay, let's stay with that. And if I suggest maybe it goes out to the arms and legs, can you imagine that quality infusing out to the fingertips and toes? And how about into your relationships? That's easier to consider, but the other, not as much. And how about into community? If people were to live their lives according to a quality of heart, a yogic quality perhaps, can you visualize what that would be? Do you long for that to happen? Yeah. So the part of the brain that's capable of visualizing those things works on fantasy, imagination. It comes from your right brain. And yoga says there are 5 kinds of knowing. And one of them is imagination, fantasy. Like our ability to conceive of something as a possibility can actually magnetically pull us towards that possibility. Now, if we're always living in fantasy like daydreaming, that's not recommended. But to be able to visualize something occurring gives us hope and optimism and commitment in that direction. If you found you couldn't quite visualize, it may be that your right brain isn't as strong for you as your left brain, and you might want more concrete information. I'm going to recommend that you suspend the need for concrete and build the capacity to visualize or imagine. Again, even if it's a cartoon image, it doesn't have to be a textbook image. Because in the process of that visualizing through the right brain, your body has a sensory response. The neurological sensory musculoskeletal response is actually in there. It's like when we were children and we visualized and we got to play. That sense of frivolity and creativity and spontaneity, we also need that to infuse our lives if we're going to live a yogic life. Many people in the West are living more of a cognitive life, more in our left brain than in our right brain. So we're good planners, perhaps. We may not be good on follow-through, but we might be really good at planning. Or we might be pretty good at reviewing what we didn't like or what went wrong or what we want to fix or correct. We might be relatively good at mathematics or at concepts that we can put into words. But to also visualize and feel into something emerging out of your visualization, that's your right brain that supports that. Fortunately, yoga uses both hemispheres of the brain and really encourages that development. I sometimes picture what was happening generations and generations ago for our ancestor yogis when they came up with the schema that we can live with, like infrastructure. And they suggested right up front, there are 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, 5 core attitudes to live with. And those have kind of stood the test of time. I suppose we're not inclined to rewrite history as yogis and yoginis now, but those 5 yamas and 5 niyamas are still contemporarily important. And they must have test-driven that and or visualized, what would my life be like if I lived in this quality? And for this morning, I'd like us to consider the first 2 yamas and the first 2 niyamas as a way to sort of bookend or create riverbanks for your life so it flows more clearly and less haphazardly. So the first of the yamas and niyamas is ahimsa. It means nonviolence. And we might have, during the meditation, we might have felt things like, I'd like to live with compassion or with kindness or love or generosity. And picking up the attitude of nonviolence as a foundation, what it will do is prevent the inclination for the more violent nature, that is, the more critical, the more judgmental, the more scathing, the more selfish in the unhealthy sense of selfish, the more likely to cause divisiveness. It diminishes that part of your mind. And what emerges is innate compassion, innate kindness, innate generosity. So in a way, the first of the yamas is like taking the volume down on the human mind's inclination for acting unwisely and unkindly. It does that when it feels threatened, because it goes into preservation instinct, and you look like part of the threat. Unless you're my closest family member or a part of my survival system, you probably look like a threat, and I separate the two of us to preserve me and my personal tribe. And your brain goes through that process on your behalf. So do the other brains in that emergency, or that perceived threat, which is how interpersonal conflict escalates all over the planet. And also speaking to the question that you two asked earlier before we started the Dharma talk about cohabitating when someone is not on the same yogic path as you are. So if we go to nonviolence and we say, I'm going to lower the inclination for the mental habit that causes cruelty or unkindness or acts unwisely, we can expect that actually what will emerge is your heart's capacity for kindness, for compassion. We can also cultivate compassion. Like sitting just across from ahimsa in the library of yamas, sitting just across from ahimsa is daya, which means mercy or compassion, and also means the yoga therapy studio here in Portland, Oregon. The Daya Foundation. The second of the yamas after ahimsa is satya, means honesty. And my guess is that for some of you, when we sat quietly to consider what quality of life, some of you wanted an authentic or genuine life, a life of personal integrity. Is that the case? And if it didn't come to heart when we were sitting, as I say it probably resonates as something you would long for. Otherwise, you would be doing something else at 10:30 on a beautiful summer day in Portland. But so that inclination for honesty and integrity and authenticity is actually very strong for us, but it opposes the biological imperative for your survival, because it causes you to risk in relationship being more honest with yourself or with somebody else. So they can seem like they're at odds. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yes. We had a long discussion about that this morning.
Uh-huh. Anything that came out of that discussion you'd be willing to say?
I find myself in a sense that the world in general feels very threatening. That people that I don't know can't trust. There's a selfishness about it that feels overwhelming at times. And so you find yourself not wanting to risk, because when you do, and the world is acting as it does, people do, then you continue to sort of build up this, oh, here we go again, and you get slapped or some form of retaliation happens, and that builds up to a point where you don't want to make those risks. You don't want to reach out to other people, or to even live the lifestyle that you dream of. Means letting go of the only thing you know that protects you, which is distance, which is maybe not honesty with or acceptance or whatever. But so we were talking about how do you stay connected to your own path and to those around you, so that you can become buoyed, like you talked about yesterday.
Yes.
So there's a sense of you're not in this alone, and there is protection there, and not everybody else is trying to get something from you, and yet protect yourself, or be able to tone down the part of you that's saying, is this going to happen again? Is this going to happen again? And that sense of survival and distance becomes the louder of the voices. And,
right.
Yeah, my daughter was talking about it just in perspective of the whole high school scene, which can be brutal.
Yes.
And I was heartbroken to say that as an adult you don't necessarily get to bypass that, that it's just different, but the same principles play out. So.
I think that I wouldn't want to be in high school again, I'll just say that. It has changed a lot since I was in high school, and the influence of social media and electronics and the social media bullying and the cliquish nature and everything that's going on there, it's really overwhelming. And you actually spoke really well to what the brain does. It starts promoting survival. And the more it promotes the survival biochemistry, the less it remembers how to promote the other. And our survival becomes limited to a few people in our personal tribe, which actually isn't how we were born. So we were born with a brain that wanted to create tribe and community and have a social network. I don't mean social media. And so we start betraying a fundamental part of ourselves to protect that smaller tribe. And some part of us knows that we're betraying that, and there's a poignancy or loss involved. And the part of us that can tolerate knowing that often gets suppressed because the part that's invested in survival is louder. So we are facing a quandary in that regard. One of the things that yoga recommends regularly is periods of refuge, like a period of retreat, like a specific kind of sanctuary in your life where your senses are not on the onslaught. It's not such constant exposure to, and your brain and mind are also not so overexposed to the dilemmas. We can turn back and remember what's more poignant or more vulnerable about our lives. And those qualities that seem harder to put forth in a social setting can become strengthened when we're in that refuge or sanctuary. We have to prioritize the time for that in our lives. And that looks really impossible to some people right now because we've scheduled relatively busy lives. And we did that scheduling ourselves. I mean, I put my own schedule together. I'm not self-employed, technically speaking, but I'm self-employed. And yet I can make a much busier schedule than I have right now. So it is a matter of having enough refuge and retreat to stabilize your brain, to renew your compassion, to make better choices based on priorities that are life priorities rather than survival instinct priorities. And I'm talking about the social survival when I say that. Of course, we want to tend to your biological survival. So what do you eat and when do you rest and so on. Yeah. That period of retreat or restoration ought to include restoring what I was talking about during the meditation, the organs of action, the organs of perception, and the organs of sense. So the 5 sense organs, the 5 organs of perception, and the 5 organs of action. That means you're restoring your senses like we talked about last night, and you're restoring your neurological, biochemical, physiological self, where the organs of action live. And those are these vital organs, but also your arms and legs and your speech. Like, how do you contribute? How do you participate in your life and your community? To restore those on a regular basis, and I don't mean regular as just on January 1st every year. I mean daily, regular basis. Some people say, oh, I'm really regular about my yoga. I do it every year on New Year's Day. Well, that's pretty regular. And I say, well, how about consistency? Oh, yeah, I'm really consistent. It's 10 o'clock on New Year's Day. Okay, how about continuity? They're still justifying. Yeah, every New Year's Day. The other 355 days of the year, they're not doing their yoga practice. So when we say regular in this case in yoga, we mean on a daily basis. So what yoga recommended as starting with the 2 of the first yamas, nonviolence and honesty, and the first 2 niyamas are called cleanliness and contentment, or saucha and santosha. So those 2, if that's steering your life a bit, cleanliness you might think of as keeping your diet clean, keeping your mind clean, keeping your relationships and your speech a little more clean, so that you don't have the residue of what stress or miscommunication or unhelpful food substances would do to your brain or your body. That residue might slough off earlier when you're younger, but as we age, the organs of action and the organs of operating the vital body, they do get tired if we keep putting an onslaught on them. So cleanliness in this case is for your benefit. It shouldn't feel like a restriction or a punishment like people might think of they're on a diet. By the way, the word diet is the same as the word die, but you add a T to the end. Most people don't like being on diets. It feels like oppression. But yoga isn't recommending an oppressive attitude towards cleanliness. It's like prioritizing that our system works really well. And we aren't carrying the residue of habit or history or tension or stress that we generate, or that we've had imposed on us and we learn to condition that generation. And santosha, which means contentment, is an attitude of contentment, turning your attention away from the negativity bias towards where we can feel gratitude or appreciation. That renews your brain at a really fundamental level. Even to remember, like through the 5 senses, very simply, what could I be experiencing contentment about today? The taste of water, the smell of the air in the garden, the sound of the birds singing at sunrise, the sight of the dahlias that are actually decaying, but were brilliant a week ago, and now these particular ones are fading, they're composting. Or the touch of the cat's face against your face. What can you immerse yourself in to say, this is precious and I can appreciate it. I feel content just to know this, just to know the cat's face against mine. Or just to have the amount of presence that sees the dahlia composting and feels touched by that. So contentment isn't, now I got my way, I can experience contentment. Or now my life is as I dreamed it to be, and I got the proper house and the proper possessions and the proper status, and now I'm going to be contented. Do you understand? It's a very different attitude. The Western attitude is, I will be contented when. And the yogic recommendation is contentment as a result of realizing the fullness of life that's already available. And those moments of contentment do act like a buffer for your brain to be restored. So you have on the one riverbank of ahimsa and satya, and on the other, saucha and santosha. And those can guide your yogic life. Those are pretty big commitments to make already. Let me pause and see if there's a thought bubble happening to my right. Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Tanya?
You can if you want me to.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. You said.
I was just thinking about how even when you do make these choices and integrate these habits into your life, there are times when it goes away, and it kind of goes a little bit like this in a wave. And what I've found with my own yoga practices and lifestyle is sometimes my schedule changes or people come into my life differently. I have my whole summers to myself because my partner is a commercial fisherman in Alaska. So I have 2 months of my yoga practices and my schedule and my very saucha cleanly house.
It does.
And now that's all been completely disrupted as he's just come home. And he's needing some extra attention right now, more so than he needs after he's been home for some time. So there are some things that I've had to give up. And I've prioritized what practices do I need at bare minimum to keep me regulated and grounded and stable. So currently I've chosen to do my meditation practice over asana, if I only have time for one in the morning, sticking with that. Now I'm physiologically craving some movement. I know that my body is saying, come on, you need some asana here. But I also know that that's temporary. So it's not completely disrupting my mental habits or my awareness of self, and I'm recognizing that this is allowing me some time to be with him in the morning, which he needs, and I need too. We're able to reconnect. So that's just seeing that there's another gift in that. That might look different from my preconceived notion of what my yogic life looks like. But I'm still in it.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, there are seasons in life and seasons in the calendar year too, like you're experiencing. Yeah. So yoga speaks to and recommends this concept I'm going to point up here called sthitau, which means stable tranquility. And it's suggested that sthitau can come through practices through which you have a steady, stiram, commitment, and a quality of ease in relationship to sukham. So sukham means happiness or ease, and stiram means steadiness or constancy. And those two qualities, as attitudes towards your commitments, help to create sthitau, stable tranquility. So if the riverbanks are relatively stable and somewhat wide enough that life can have variation in it, not such a narrow river that it easily floods, it easily gets triggered, for example, like we talked about the brain getting flooded when you get triggered. If the concept of the life is too narrow or too rigid, you're going to be more floodable, more triggerable. There'll be fewer things that you can accept. So your brain will spark on that survival mechanism pretty quickly. But if it's too wide, if it's too lax, we end up with more of a floodplain. And the river isn't going to a particular destination. It's just washing out again and again. So we want those riverbanks to help hold the channel for the unfolding of your yoga, which is to say your love and realization and expansiveness. Not your yoga like your downward dog pose. It's great to have dog pose, but that's not what the word yoga actually meant. Downward facing dog meant downward facing dog. And yoga meant to say yoga. Downward dog is a tool of yoga. So inside those riverbanks, if on a daily basis we have this period of restoration for our senses and for our brains to come back to our most precious values, we're going to feel we're more in integrity with ourselves. You'll also make choices to keep your life a little cleaner so you're not battling the residue. We may more often experience contentment rather than disappointment. And we'll be more likely to experience the non-violence of life, the flourishing of kindness and love in our lives. We do have to make those priorities. So yoga recommends a system for looking at how you prioritize. And so that's called dinacharya, which is up here. The daily, dina means daily, charya means cycle, the daily cycle. What has to be included in that daily cycle? Each of us has a physical body that houses the organs of vitality, the organs of perception, and the organs of action. They're called organs in yoga. I'm speaking about something that you might not use the English word organs for, but that's how it's translated from in yoga. So we have the 5 organs of action, the 5 organs of perception, the 5 organs of sensing the world. And so we need to take care of those things to produce the best possible ecosystem for us to feel like we're in our integrity and loyalty and grace with ourselves. So yoga recommends waking up at the same time as sunrise, if not an hour before sunrise. Because there is a quiet tranquility available at that time of day. It's actually in the cycle of nature that an hour before sunrise there's this auspicious stillness before the winds start coming. And when we awaken at that rhythm, you can feel the auspicious part of the day. It happens again at sunset, about an hour after sunset. There's a quality of stillness and luminosity that's emerging. And that happens twice a day. So if all we were able to make as a commitment is that twice a day we sit in the auspicious light of that transition, we would start seeing life more through the yogic lens. Many people wake up out of insomnia at that time of day, and they go to thinking and planning and reviewing and problem solving without actually getting problems solved. Or they might pick up their phone and look at their email or get on their technology, or turn on the news to get the brain stimulated by some world event. So that's a misuse of the auspicious time of day. So you can engage those things at another time, but it's considered highly precious to have that auspicious window be for your stitao, your stable sense of tranquility. To taste awe or grace on a daily basis and to have 2 opportunities that are designed by nature is so refreshing to your whole system. But I want to encourage you not to miss it. And if that's the only commitment a person can make when I'm working with them therapeutically, whether that's psychological therapy, spiritual therapy, or physical therapy, if that's the only commitment they can make, I do see it still making a difference. Part of what happens is we are reminded in that auspicious, natural moment in the day that we're a part of nature. We're a part of the natural life cycle that's much bigger than our personal lives. And that more vast perspective starts to inform the qualities we want to live our lives with. Another thing that happens is you see how ephemeral that precious, auspicious, luminous part of the day is. You actually see it fading. You'll start to see life get a little busier, even the creatures get busier, and the world wakes up. Go to a tropical country where you have birdsong at 4 a.m. for a couple of hours, and it's like, it's a little cool, it's a little breezy, the birds are singing, and then a couple hours later, the humidity and the heat feels oppressive, and it doesn't feel as auspicious. So when we realize it's also ephemeral, we're reminded that our lives too are fleeting and precious. So we have this big, expansive realization, and then we have this precious and vulnerable realization twice a day. That can do a lot. I don't want us to overlook the importance of that. So those two moments, an hour before sunrise, an hour after sundown, are really important times for meditation. Or simply sitting and contemplating. If you don't know how to quote-unquote meditate, sit and enjoy, let your senses experience the beauty around you. Rather than the onslaught of our own thoughts affecting our senses and the onslaught of other things affecting the senses, like the really busy city or your Facebook page or your bookkeeping, for example. Another auspicious time of day from the yogic perspective for Dinacharya is when the sun is at the high point in the sky. We are meant to transform our lives by having experiences that we can chew on, as it were, we can digest, metabolize, make use of, and then eliminate what's not useful. We're meant to do that with all kinds of things, like information, emotions, life events, and food. And so Ayurveda and yoga prioritize this digestive event in the middle of the day. So when the sun is at the high point, which right now it also feels pretty hot at that part of the day here in Portland, that's when we're recommended to have the main meal to nourish the body and the brain. And to digest it well, it's then recommended that you rest for 15 minutes lying on your left side after eating. It takes about 15 minutes for the blood to go to the stomach to start the process of digesting the food. We recommend 20 minutes here at the studio. 20 minutes of left side down, which means LSD. Try telling the school system about that. Right, because watch when kids are having their lunches right now in school. We have still one high schooler. He's going to be in his senior year. The school lunch is earlier in the day, and it's shorter than the allotted time you would need to actually make the food choice, sit down, enjoy the food, digest the food, and then have some social and playtime with your schoolmates. So the digestive system of our teenagers and middle school and grade schoolers too is kind of in havoc right now, if you ask me. It's not an Ayurvedic rhythm, it's not a yogic rhythm. We're not promoting their digestion to be lifelong strong, which is really unfortunate because, again, this isn't just metaphorical that yoga and Ayurveda say this, but healthy digestion for food is actually synonymous with healthy digestion for life events. Think about it just for a few moments. If you're constipated, are you digesting your life events very well? I mean, I'm not asking metaphorically. If you're actually constipated, do you feel like, yeah, I can work on my spiritual practice right now? You're a little distracted, right? When let's say you've been constipated for 3 or 4 days, you feel like, wow, now's a really good time to contemplate the vastness of the universe.
The universe is very small.
Right? Yeah, very small. Right. And if you have, like, let's say, consistent experiences of food allergies and sensitivity, so you eat and then you feel sick, or then you have diarrhea, do you feel like it's okay to, like, you're meditating on compassion and social justice? Well, you're pretty distracted. So I'm not just saying it metaphorically, because now we know that the gut-brain axis actually promotes so much good in your body. For example, if digestion is working well, and I mean the whole system for digestion, your gut-brain axis is probably working better. And that's one of the keys to your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve is one of the platforms, the foundations for your sense of compassion, benevolence, empathy. And it's also supported by benevolence, empathy, and compassion. So if you're constipated, have empathy for yourself. If you're experiencing indigestion or diarrhea, respond with kindness to yourself. Anger won't restore your gut-brain axis anyway. But it is to say those things are very distracting when it's happening. So digesting a life event on the foundation of a healthy nervous system and good vagal tone is much easier. Your instinct to be kind towards yourself will be a lot stronger. The urge to be irritable will start to fade. And a life event won't seem like an imposition, but rather more of an opportunity. And by opportunity, I mean the opportunity to risk, like the questions that you were asking about before, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So those are 3 high points in the day. 2 auspicious periods for meditation, and 1 really important part of the day for eating your main meal. Does that seem like too cluttered? Too much to take care of?
No, but it's at odds with how everybody else does it. If you're working through the day and you've got a 20-minute lunch and your kid's at school, and how do you?
Right. So let me speak forcefully for a few moments. Right. Let's say we're going to commit to nonviolence, ahimsa, and let's say we realize that our brains would be much more nourished by auspicious early morning, auspicious later evening, and prioritizing lunch. And we realize this could make us a better operating system as a human organism. Now, to keep that commitment, we have to start advocating for ourselves. That's where you go to satya, or honesty. Like, I've had this realization, now how am I going to employ this realization in my life? I'll have to speak to other people who might have some supervisory role over me, like a teacher, a boss, something in that system, to advocate for myself to get my needs met. We're going to do that better if we're experiencing ourselves as ahimsa and saucha. So we aren't carrying the residue of stress or tension, and we don't see the other person as our opponent. We can actually switch to see that person as our ally. That's a mental process, to switch them from the opponent to the ally. You'll be more likely to do that if you're coming to the conversation with kindness, with nonviolence, essentially, as opposed to pushing against the person. We want to be able to get them on our team, as it were. Now, of course, you go say to this person, for example, well, my whole system would operate better under a yogic schedule. And you see their eyes start like swirling in their head. And say, well, my brain is going to be a lot healthier and more nourished if I'm able to have a lunch period in nature with birds chirping and some rest period afterwards. And then a little bit of chai and a walk around the block. And the eyes are rolling in the head, and they start seeing the arms cross, and they scratch the side of the face. Like, I'm not getting what you're talking about here. So how you approach advocating for yourself needs to be relational. Set your priorities and also speak wisely, kindly, and in I'm going to recommend layperson's language. It is interesting to see that when people have, let's say you have a standard job and you're also diabetic, the company that you work for can't oppose your needs. But you have to have diabetes to start saying what your needs are.
Yeah.
Lunches now.
So, right.
Breast-
So
breastfeeding
before,
sometimes.
say again?
Breastfeeding
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, they can't oppose those biological needs. So advocating before we have those sorts of derivations in our biological or physiological health would actually be a lot more effective and more efficient. So in a way, we have to start making a culture change. And one of the risks, to go back to what you were saying before, is we actually stand out a bit when we start making a change to advocate for ourselves. And that causes the part of the brain that knows that it survives by attaching to others and creating harmony and community. It causes that part of the brain to get concerned about your survival. Because if you speak up for yourself and somebody else doesn't, do they start to feel irritated about you? Do they envy you in a way that's uncomfortable? Do they judge you? Do they see you as aloof or arrogant? That's not comfortable. So this is the interpersonal work of finding our yogic path. Do you follow as I'm saying there? It's okay. So I'm going to draw a little map for a moment, and that means I have to erase what I've got up here now. And the map I'm going to draw is the map of the koshas, which many of you have seen before, but I want to put a couple specifics on here. By the way, the word Ayurveda, which was just up there, Ayur means life and Veda means knowledge. Ayurveda is the science of, or the knowledge of life, like how to live a life that promotes your yoga to happen. And by yoga, again, I don't mean downward dog pose. What does that remind you of? Anybody who knows me for any time? The 3 circles? Yeah, thank you.
What?
So, I'll take a little diversion. Your mind, just like mine, has a lot of impressions already in it. That's how we get that conditioned mind, and how we promote the conditioning that's more about survival than about our yogic life. Right? To say, the brain chemistry of the survival brain is very powerful. That's an understatement. With those impressions, this one is from my early life. So each time that I start drawing the picture of the koshas, and this is reinforced now because I tell the story about this, so I'm making it a stronger groove, a stronger samskara. I draw the picture, and as I'm doing it, I can feel my grandfather's hand showing me how to draw 3 circles, because he wanted me to know that you could, just by drawing 3 circles, you would start the illustration of a pig, like that.
Cute.
And my grandfather was like my hero in life. He was what we call the one loving witness, and this is Alice Miller's term. He was like God to me. There's another story about how my grandfather got to take God's job, but that's for a different time. He died when I was 8, so my impressions of him are all prior to me being 8 years old, and this one lasted for a long time, as you can see. So every time I start drawing the koshas, my grandfather comes to mind. It's very pleasant, not even that intrusive for me, and a playful way to demonstrate that your brain and then your mind also have its own patterns. So when you smell something, when you see something, when you hear somebody when you see that little roll of the eyes in the spousal unit when you go home with your intention and his is different. This is not in my household because we met at a different time in life and we're both on the yogic path. But when you see that little gesture, your whole brain and sensory system have a response to it. We might even say a reaction. Response is a different sentiment than reaction. So here with the koshas, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so this is the Annamaya kosha, and as I was just saying, what yoga recommends here is that you're prioritizing your food, your rest, and some movement. To care for the physical body. Yoga is not recommending that you pick up athletics. Go ahead and do so. It's not recommending that you don't. But the yogic life, to really look with fidelity and loyalty to it, is simply saying, let's nourish the body, let's rest the body, and let's move the body just enough to prepare it for meditation, love, and grace. So the yogic model wasn't let's climb Mount Everest. Now, people do that back in the home country of yoga, and that's wonderful and fun. And yet, if you're going to explore yogic realization, what they're recommending is eat just enough, rest just enough, and move just enough so that your body is prepared for that. So here in this country, we have a compulsive exercise craze, and people often overdo it. I'm not recommending that you stop your athletics, or if you're training for a triathlon, yada yada. Just really look at, am I also nourishing my body, or am I breaking it down for the purpose of that goal? And as I break it down, do I experience more self-kindness and compassion and love and camaraderie? Or do I experience aches and pains and irritability and frustration? So you have to ask yourself the question, coming back again to ahimsa and satya. At the pranamaya kosha, which is here, yoga is recommending that you tend to your nervous system. Now, ancient yogis didn't call that the nervous system. They were more likely to say, tend to your vayus, the energetic centers in the body, and your chakras, the 7 wheels of energy in the body, and tend to consciousness. So they did this with breathing practices. And chanting is a part of that process. It regulates the nervous system back towards what we now call the ventral vagal parasympathetic response. When you hear me say vagal there, that's related to vagal tone, related to your vagus nerve. So tend to this also means in the balancing of stitao, of stable tranquility, what do you have to lessen? What do you have to reduce to preserve your nervous system's tranquility? What do you have to promote? Well, you promote the auspicious morning and evening, but what are you also going to be lessening? I would say lessen your overexposure to things that stimulate you unwisely, like fashion magazines. Phones. Computers.
Rings.
Yeah.
Listening to the radio constantly in the car.
Yeah.
Or at the house, the first thing you do is turn on the radio or TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Reduce the exposure to those things that make your mind and your brain busy, or those things that require your brain to kind of catch up in the aftermath. which is to say, come back to Saucha to live more cleanly. What are you imposing on your brain now that you know isn't so useful? Let's say, how many of you think it would be wise to reduce the amount of caffeine you're drinking? Okay, so not for you, but lots of other nods. Because you can feel the impact on your brain and your body when you drink more caffeine than is wise for you. So as the caffeine is reaching the lips, you have to ask the question, is this going to support my nervous system? Is this going to support my stable tranquility? The answer for some of you might be no. And the answer might also look like, no, but I got to get some stuff done right now. Or no, but everyone's doing it. Or no, but it tastes so good. No, I deserve a retreat. I deserve a treat, excuse me. No, but I deserve a treat. I deserve a reward. No, this won't help my nervous system, but I did kind of earn it just now. No, it won't really help my nervous system, but it's going to help me digest the pizza I just ate, which was too much for my digestion to handle on its own. Let me get some coffee in there. So we have all kinds of excuses that we make for why we indulge in that thing that your brain and body will have to overcome. Has to work harder to digest it. So the nervous system is getting affected by that as well. And also interesting, how many of you think it would be helpful to reduce the numbers of times you think poorly about yourself? That's also what to lessen on the residue of your nervous system, because thinking poorly about yourself actually has a biochemical, neurological response system in there. Yes?
So what if you really like pizza and you really like cupcakes?
Eat them when the sun is at the highest point in the sky. Eat it with absolute mindfulness. Eat the organic available versions. Eat the most clean experience of it. Rest on your left side after eating it. Immerse your senses in contentment and joy as you do it, and then be done with it. Don't then tell yourself a bad story about the calories you have to now burn, or a story about how this is not yogic and so on, but really immerse yourself in it completely at the optimal time of day.
So most people don't enjoy pizza together at an hour before sunrise.
No, I'm not talking about before sunrise. I'm talking about the sun at the high point in the sky. But what you're likely to notice is that sometimes the craving for certain foods actually isn't about your love of that food. It's a craving for things like salt, sugar, and fat. It's a craving for an adjustment of your biochemistry. And often the craving can feel also animalistic. Like if I don't eat it, I might die, or I have to eat it now, or I've earned this, or this is going to help me right now to take the edge off. So be aware, if you've overstimulated your system, you might have more cravings more often. And they might start feeling compulsive, not instinctive. So eat your pizza totally mindfully, cleanest version possible. When the sun is at the high point in the sky, immerse all of your senses in it. Utterly enjoy it to the point of contentment, not to the point of bloating. Rest on your left side and see what's next.
Yeah, most of the time when I eat pizza, it's with people and it's at night.
Yeah.
So and yeah, and it's just like I think it's more, it might be like a sharing thing or dinner, like.
That's why people
But-
smoke together, drink together.
We need communion with each other. It's absolutely true. Our social networks need each other. And we've done that through food for generations and generations. But we also can do that through the wise intake of food. So some of what I'm recommending you'll have to go back to again. The most nonviolent approach to this and the most honest approach, they seem to be at odds because you'll have to talk to other people in your social network about how to do this in a healthy way. So the Manamaya Kosha is the next layer in, and this is where yoga is really recommending you have a responsibility, some stewardship for your senses. You have a sensory motor cortex, you have a sensory layer in the brain, and it's getting information from your body. You also have sense perceptions that come from the outside world. They come through your thalamus and into your amygdala and help you to interpret very quickly what to do. If you don't have like a daily restoration of the senses, they do get overactive. And they start misinterpreting, like the rope that's a snake, but no, it's actually a rope. Or they misinterpret the eye roll of the yoga student when you're teaching the class. Oh, they really don't like me. They might have been thinking about somebody else altogether. So we call this in yoga pratyahara, means to turn the senses inward. It's a withdrawal of the senses from the overstimulated world for the purpose of deep restoration. It's actually delicious because when you re-emerge from that, the senses work a lot better. They're more refined. In the history of yoga, pratyahara actually meant, in the classical era of yoga, it meant big austerity and removal of your senses from the world to awaken to God and consciousness. That turned out to be too harsh. For some, they're still doing it that way. They're more aesthetics. But then tantric yoga came along to try to swing it to the other side, and what they determined was immersing yourself in the sense pleasures is also a pathway to God. In fact, it is. If you really immerse yourself in the fragrance of the stargazer lily, and you're so there, you're communing with nature and with grace and consciousness itself. But what happened is human nature took that and swung it into great indulgence. Just like they took the first and swung it into austerity. So I like to think that classical yoga and tantric yoga are like two banks of a river, and they both had valid, wise teachings. We came along with our human inclination to extreme things, and we pushed them into too much austerity and too much indulgence. So I'm recommending you have a period of withdrawal and a period of refined expression of your senses. Use them. If you're not exposing your eyes to beauty every day, and I'm going to suggest that it's the natural beauty and also seeing beauty in other humans, you're missing out on something that you would, if you got like a terminal illness, somebody said you got 30 days to live, would you spend time looking at Facebook or at the garden and the mountains and the ocean, the night sky and the stars? We need to prioritize so we're feeding the best possible brain through our senses. The Manamaya Kosha also says, watch what you think. Spend time being aware to steward helpful thoughts. The negativity bias is a real thing. It's got a name now. You felt it as a real thing many times in your life. When your brain goes to negativity about something, it's stimulated by your survival instinct. That negativity bias is primal to you, but it doesn't need to be quickened or exacerbated so often. So watch how you think your doom thoughts or your angry thoughts, and especially your self and other thoughts, which is what we'll finish with when we start talking about that today for the questions that you guys asked. This one here is called the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Means your intuitive body.
How do you spell that?
Vijnana. It's the layer of the human system that's based on intuition. If you think of these actually as layers, Annamaya Kosha is the most dense. It actually requires the most care because it's so dense. Here it is, muscles and bones and organs and so on. Pranamaya Kosha, more subtle, requires consistent care and is more powerful at supporting your journey than your Annamaya Kosha. Manamaya Kosha, more subtle yet again, and more powerful to get you to nudge back home here. Vijnanamaya Kosha, really subtle and even more powerful than the physical body for bringing you back home to the center. So if we don't make time on a regular basis for refuge or retreat where intuition can surface, you're probably missing out. Your intuition is in there. I don't recommend you have like a super busy day, lie down at night and hope for intuition to surface about your life dilemmas. What often happens is you lie down at night and you start thinking for the first time in the day about those life dilemmas. And you get more anxious, not more settled. So creating periods of the day where intuition can surface means periods of silence, quietude, reflection, resting. Resting the body, resting the nervous system, resting the mind, and allowing intuition to surface, to come to you. If you've had an insane mind, just one moment, you might think of yourself as a feral cat. The feral cat is hypervigilant and requires you to be like, here kitty kitty, here kitty kitty, and to leave a little food and some proximity for that feral cat's highly activated limbic brain to consider connecting to food and to you. So if your brain's been a little bit insane, if your mind is really more like a feral cat than a sleeping puppy, You may need to tend to it through these layers to come back to your sense of intuition. This actually is often the case if we've experienced more traumatizing early environments, that we couldn't trust our own intuition because we didn't have the power to make things different. Our intuition could have said A, but we had to tell ourselves B in order to stay in a certain circumstance. So if you lost your trust of your intuition, we do need to regain it. And I often say it was probably working at the time. It wasn't intuition that had to fail us. It was just circumstances that we had to organize to stay safe in. So if that's part of your history and your intuition feels a little bit distanced, we can bring that back. But we do it through these layers of care. Do you understand what I mean by that? Okay, Maddie.
Oh, I was going to say Christopher Wallace was talking about intuition, and it was really cool because he was saying, the quiet periods and hiking and stuff like that. But he did, which rang true for me, like moments of play, like being in your garden and just playing. And that also allows intuitive thoughts to kind of guide through when you're not focusing on something and you're just having fun.
Right. So you can get to intuition, and let's say through the physical body, the pranic body, the mental body, like this, if we have the deep rest, but also how does your nervous system and your brain and mind rest when you're just playing in the garden? You've lifted your attention from your habitual circular thinking into this here and now. And often people in the garden do get their intuition to surface. Now they're physically active, that's good for the reptilian brain. They're breathing, also good for the reptilian brain. But they're not thinking about the chaos of life, so the little limbic brain in there is going, oh, it's fine. It's like when you're gardening and the dog is sleeping in the grass next to you. That part of your brain is at rest, and intuition starts to emerge. Similarly with more hiking, more frivolity, more play, more spontaneity. Like just letting the brain come out of the groove it gets in about survival. We don't just need frivolity as kids. We need frivolity and play as for our whole life spectrum. And then finally here in the center, this is called Ananda, and refers to the essential experience of love and belonging. And we want to prioritize that by really establishing our sense of Sangha or community. That we have a sense where we do belong. We have a sense of our innate, unconditional welcome in the family of humans. And that may need to be a few precious people for you. Not to the point of isolating others or making them wrong, but to restore your ability to then cohabitate on the planet that's pretty overcrowded right now. This is where the value of Sangha becomes so important. But Sangha is also created by shared physical practice, shared pranayama practice, shared meditation practice, and so on. Even shared gardening or shared service to others, or shared chanting or poetry. There's many ways to do it. You can paint together. In fact, you guys could go down the street and paint the new studio for us. They're down there now. If you want to get out of your mind and do some rolling. Butter up and sausage hue, and those are the colors of the paints. Jay and Mark are down there right now, probably laying out drop cloths.
That was very meditative for me. I used to roll paint for a living, and I just loved it. It was just I got paid to meditate. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, at work, one time they were painting in my office, and the men got to, it was all men doing the painting, and they got to wear these things, like stilts attached to their feet. And I thought, I would so much rather do that than my own job.
Yeah, and you were a human resources specialist,
Yes.
is that right? Yeah, so you dealt with a lot of data and important decisions and regulations and such like this, is that
And
right?
people.
Yeah, and people. And he was just painting on the stilts.
Just walk
Yeah.
up and down, and when you're done, you can see you're done, and you get to walk on stilts.
Yeah. Mhm. Well, given this, the riverbanks from the yamas and niyamas, and the concepts of what we really need to tend to, so you don't have to add activities. Just know that auspicious early morning, auspicious later evening, high point of the day for your meal, you actually can engage all 5 of these koshas with that. This will also build your sense of faith. We call shraddha. It means faith that we're going in the right direction. Because you'll actually start to feel the biochemical, physiological, psychological wellness that emerges from these commitments.
What is Shraddha?
Shraddha means faith, that you're going in the right direction. When you're aware of this system, if your life starts to produce symptoms, a symptom might be like angst or existential despair or a headache or digestive issues. If you start getting symptoms, you could just say, oh, maybe I'm a little off course right now, having some symptoms. I can come back to tend to these things. Rather than looking at symptoms as problems or intrusions or they're in the way, the symptoms are telling you something is out of balance that could be tended to. Now, some of you mentioned symptoms a bit ago, like the dilemma of the brain going more towards survival than towards ease. And sometimes you have relational symptoms. People are at odds with your personal commitments. And you mentioned living with someone who's not particularly on the yogic path, so some symptoms come up with that, right? Mm-hmm. Might be frustration or bafflement or disappointment. Like, is this the case?
Yeah, I'll invite him to come do it with me, or why don't you try some of this with me? And we've been together 30-some years, so he is what he is. So. But it's just kind of, and then trying to have my space within his space, be it TV news blaring in the other room that's just right next to where I do my yoga, or his awareness of what I need so that I can function at a high level, especially in the summer. That kind of stuff like that. Going to bed at the same time. He wants to stay up late. Just throws you a curveball almost every day.
Yeah.
And I'm so like, I've got to be here, or I can't do this.
Yeah.
I have to be on my yoga practice, or I can't pull this day off. That's kind of more what it's about.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, you're talking about your basic survival. Without your yoga practice, you can't handle the schedule you have in the summer.
Yeah.
Lexi is a surf teacher, and very busy in the summer in Seaside. And in fact, before you said what you said, I was going to say about sometimes we just keep feeling that we're constantly in the surf. It's coming at us. It's coming at us. It's coming at us. And what you just described is, you go home and you're in the surf. In your husband's rhythm. Yeah. It's coming at you, and you know that rhythm is opposed to what you most need right now to stay resilient and clear. Yeah. So an interesting opportunity emerges in that as we prioritize our fundamental resilience and buoyancy, like I said last night, as you make that a priority, it'll increase your capacity for love. When we don't prioritize, it increases our capacity for resentment or irritation. Because the brain will actually go towards more resentment. It'll start to feel like depleted and then betraying its most underlying preciousness. It gets angry about that. So I said
I've experienced that.
Yes. Yeah. So you're in conflict with yourself, and we often choose that conflict instead of the perceived interpersonal conflict with the other. If we prioritize our well-being. So who are we betraying first?
Yourself.
We're betraying ourselves. And who do we get annoyed at first? The other person. Yeah, so then going back to ahimsa and satya, like to get really honest with ourselves about the mechanism that we're doing that with. I'm not talking about self-blame or self-shame, but accountability to our most resilient self. So we are going to be in better alignment with our life values, with our capacity to love. The risk, the first few moments of the risk to say, I'm going to bed now, if your husband prefers to go to bed later and to go to bed together, the first few moments of that risk, once you hurdle it a few times, it's going to get easier. But the first few hurdles can feel like I'm about to get into trouble because I'm making a decision that prioritizes going to bed on time. Now, cognitively, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but viscerally and physiologically, it will make sense that you make this decision. You're slightly severing the attachment system you have with your husband. And part of your brain will be like, is this okay? Because for 30 years we've survived together. We have a dance that we do. And my answer to you is test drive it. Give yourself at least a week to go to bed at a rhythm that feels like yours. And see what emerges from that.
well, I do that, and then I feel like there's a disconnection. I feel like 'cause I'm gone so much of the day, and then I come home and I'm like, well, I'm going to bed at 8:30. Are you going to join me? And then he's like, no, I'm going to watch the evening news. I'm going to check the weather and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to bed. And then there's this feeling of a detachment, like, this is our time to be together that part of the day. And so then I get up early in the morning to try to embrace my meditation and my yoga practice. And bless his heart, he gets up, and like, I'm trying to get up before he gets up so I can go in there before the television is on, so I can have my practice. And the next thing I know, I hear him stirring. It's like, oh no, get this over with quick. So I try to have my moment here before he gets up, because there goes the news on and the weather again, and it's like,
Get him a headset or
Headphones.
headphones.
get him a headset.
Get him
I would just have an old
headphones.
TV.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I've been trying it a lot. It's just, and sometimes he'll come to bed. Sometimes if he's tired enough, he'll come to bed or whatever. But so maybe I just have to kind of a little bit just try to stay on my path and just know that in the summer months when it's like this, he's where he is.
The winter will come.
I'm over there. And
Right, but I think here's a way to ask yourself the important questions. Because you're making an effort on your schedule for rest, which is here. What happens next with your thoughts about what you've just done with the decision? And how is that affecting your nervous system? 'Cause I'm actually hearing you've made the decision, but your thoughts aren't 100%, and maybe they're not even 51% yet, steeped in kindness and nurturance towards yourself. There's maybe a little bit of guilt or a feeling of loss, or
a little bit of loss, a little bit like we should stay connected, like we should be connected when I'm struggling to try to keep up, like he should be there, and a little bit like he just wants to keep doing his own thing, what he does, and I'm like, okay, well, you're not hearing me now, but I have to hear myself, so I have to go to bed. Like I have to take care of myself. So it gets into ways of that sometimes. And other times he's receptive, and he'll say, oh, you're going to bed early? Yes, I always go to bed early. That's what I do. Are you joining?
Did you notice I always go to bed early?
I do go to bed early. It's like none of that. So maybe it's just a different dance, that you're in the summer. I don't know, maybe it's just that. It doesn't seem that way when I'm off season.
Right, but something is happening for you, Lexi, that shows in your eyes, your skin tone, your voice, and your breathing. And it's related to an underlying pain or fear or loss.
Yeah, I think I feel that. Not to get so personal, but yeah, that's probably what
It's okay to get personal. That's why we're here. So that's coming from your Manamaya kosha.
Okay.
It's housed there like all of our samskaras are. It flows out into your nervous system and into your body. So while you're making a healthy choice for yourself, it would be really supportive if we could look at the underlying pain, loss, and fear, and at the same time bring in a quality of deep personal appreciation for the risk you're taking to go to bed. Don't minimize. This is not a small thing, because if it were a small thing, you wouldn't be talking about it now. It would have been settled. You and your husband would be like playful about it. It's not a small thing. Something bigger is going on under the surface. So that's why I say to bring a great deal of self-appreciation for the risk and the courage required to do what you're doing. Now, as you turn that appreciation on yourself, you might start crying. Because you just referenced you'd like some appreciation and support from him. That he would be more on your team. And my recommendation is going to put you more on your own team right now. And he may come to that team, but he may not realize that the need is there. So the first way to meet that need is from you to you.
Yeah, I get that.
You're welcome. Were you going to say something in
Our
response to that?
generation is so conditioned, especially for the women, to meet everybody else's needs
Yes.
first.
Exactly.
And when you meet your needs, boy, you damn well better feel guilty and justified about it, because you're going to get shit one way or the other. And I think that to fight that huge momentum over the years
Yes.
takes an enormous amount of strength and courage.
It does.
Because the opposition to that has been brewing for.
Right, and let's also consider, like, we can, let's back up and make a widescreen view of this, that from the first menstrual cycle that we have as women and through menopause, the hormonal structure tells you to care for others. It's programmed. Then as you're going through menopause, you start to change your hormone structure, and it says, care less for others and more for yourself. So this is right.
It's not always well received.
No, but if the male counterpart and or our younger or older counterparts didn't know that this is also driven by our hormones, we might do some education for that. But we have to know that in the pitta season of our lives as women, when we have menstrual cycles, we are programmed to care for and prioritize the needs of others. So instead of then, when you realize that your own needs are important as you're going through menopause, don't resent that you cared for others for decades. You were programmed to do so. To put it in perspective, that you weren't like chronically self-abandoning all the time. You also had a hormone panel that said take care of others. Now we have to develop our skills and our sea legs for that, and also help our companions to understand the change that we're going through. Pamela?
Yeah, I've really seen that. My husband and I have only been married 8 years, so I met him when I was in the latter part of my pitta time, and I was like more caring to him and the kids, and then the kids moved out, and menopause happened, and I just started speaking up for myself, changing things, and bless his heart, my husband's very supportive, but sometimes I have to remind him. And I'll say things like, you know, it's really important for me. He's great with my meditation, but just like you in the morning, if I don't get up in time and he's getting up, I'm like, oh, dang, I need to get up at like 4 now instead of 5. Because I need that quiet time. But at night, I'll say, okay, I'm going to go to bed at 9. It'd be great if you were to join me. And so I give him that option, and sometimes he'll be like, well, you know, and he'll reply too, like, you know, I do want to go to bed with you, but I need to get some stuff done, or I'm going to stay up late. But I found by saying that, it's sort of like 50-50. Sometimes he'll come to bed with me early, or sometimes he'll stay up late, and it's been working okay having that balance. But
Yeah.
And I found that, like, when I have opposite schedules with Paul, like taking 20 minutes to go for a walk every night, just so we can reconnect in our relationship, and it's also soothing for us both. So
Yes.
just taking just like a little bit of time to get that, because you both need it to hold on to to build your relationship. You need that like togetherness to be able to, you know, if you don't talk and you just walk and you don't say anything, even if you're doing it not together. But then sometimes you get into conversations, and then those conversations but doing that focus towards each other.
Yeah. In fact, it's recommended that for some social reconnection, specifically with adolescents and also with mates if you've been disconnected for a time, that you have a moving process, like you're walking together, so your reptilian brain is getting movement and respiration, and you're sharing a destination, but you're not like eye to eye for that time, which can seem like too intense or too vulnerable. And strangely, it seems to work very well to take teenagers for a drive in the car to have that intimate conversation.
The taxi syndrome, I call that.
Yeah, so
Like,
there
all
we
of a sudden
are.
You're hearing all the adolescent angst and what so-and-so said at a party and awful boy, and you're like, you can't see your face.
What I meant was the adolescent is in the passenger seat and you're driving. And there's actually a recommendation for that for some of the difficult conversations you have to have with adolescents.
I talk a lot in hockey. I have all these boys in the car, and it's great because I actually steer their conversations into certain directions, and it's so great. They have the most amazing conversations, and you think, these guys are just kids, you know?
Yeah.
But you have an opportunity.
But if you tried the same conversation or the same connection by watching TV together, it doesn't work as well, because that piece about moving and walking is regulating your brain. The car is some movement, so the scenery is changing and it's like refreshing a bit. And yes, of course, you're trapped in the car unless they jump out. But to initiate a reconnecting time that way can actually be very effective.
Can you say physiology? What's going on there? You're walking and you're pleasing.
When you walk together, so let's say you need a 20-minute connection time, and this may be the case for you guys, that you ask for a mutual commitment. You might do it as a yogic practice, which would be, we go for a walk, there's walking, there's breathing, There's arm swinging, there's the body taking in the environment. We're not actually talking, but each of us is noticing footsteps or flowers or red house and blue sky. And what you're doing there by that noticing is taking your top-down processing, your cognitive processing, with your bottom-up brain, so that's your neocortex and your reptilian brain, to calm the limbic brain, which is where you seek connection, or food, by the way. So, and other things too, but you seek connection through your limbic brain. You're a mammalian brain system. So if your top-down and bottom-up processes are working as you do that mutual walk, you actually will feel more connected to each other, even if you said nothing. And at times it's better to say nothing, because we're just going to try to cognitively get ourselves out of stress, but you may be talking yourself into a conflict.
Yeah, maybe don't say yoga or anything. Or say you're going to do your yoga walk. Just say beautiful.
Yeah.
Quiet
And
walk.
you know.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues actually, she's a counselor and she works with, a lot with teenagers, and she has 4 King Charles Cavaliers, one of each color, because there's only 4 colors in the breed. And she takes the kids out for walks. So they'll take the dogs, and she'll have to, and the kid will have to, and it just opens the kids up instead of just being in a room being stared at,
Yeah.
like they're saying. It's
Yeah.
just like
That can be very
You're
effective.
under arrest. Please.
Yeah. So let's come back around to the questions that you asked earlier on, because you know what yoga recommends as a yogic life, and Ayurveda as well. There's this thing called the 51% rule, which means 51% of the time make your commitments and you'll see your life change. My experience of the 51% rule is that it works and starts promoting your 70 or 80% commitment. So we're not saying 100% of the time your schedule is 4 p.m. to midnight. There's a way to work with that, to find a proper dinacharya. The word's not up here anymore, but dinacharya. It doesn't have to be 100% on, but there are those high points to hit. And once you're committed to that nurturance, I'm looking back at Lexi again, and also the dilemma that you brought up and your dilemma before, with that quality of infusion in your life, your Brahma Viharas will be that much more natural. So from last night's discussion, equanimity will come more easily. Compassion for yourself and others will come more easily. Will sit more often in perspective and preciousness. And then when you tend to the interpersonal dilemma, you can come to it willing to feel the pain that you're in, the vulnerability that accompanies that pain, and more honest about that with your person, whoever those person or persons might be. That is to say, it's probably not that honest to lodge a complaint at Tom, and more honest to say what your fear or vulnerability is. But we may not have practiced that part of the conversation yet. And it does take practice. So we first practice softening ourselves, making ourselves more resilient, more porous by these means. So you'll have the courage and self-compassion for taking the action. Does this make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
And then when others are looking at your decisions and they have a little affront to it, our entire response can be one of compassionate presence and non-flinching. When we flinch, even if we're making the exterior beautiful, like the face looks placid or kind, but when we're flinching, their brain feels that too. We can make it less and less, like a complete non-issue, by our own full presence in compassion and kindness. My family is unable to flinch around me anymore, and when they do, they realize it's about them. I mean my biological family. Let's say there was a family reunion within the last year, and so 12 of us were in the same house, stuck in that house together. 3-4 generations of us in there, and there's a lot of historical conflict. In fact, my divorced parents were both there with their new mates, and anyway, it was complicated. My teenage stepsons were there with my sister's infants and my brother's infant, and it's just sort of hard to organize all that. But they couldn't flinch or get a rile up about me or my yogic life. And it's what I bring to it. They are in conflict with some of the decisions I would make, but they can't flinch about it anymore. And when they do, it's a little like a temporary firework, and then it fades because there's nothing for it to land on. One of my friends, he teaches this. Let me try this here. Try it again. Let me try this one. So that's the reflex. When somebody has something to toss at you, you want to catch it. Oh, that one didn't toss very well. Here, honey. Thank you. Yeah. That's very good. Yeah. That's the thing. The reflex is if it's getting tossed at you interpersonally and you feel like catching it, then you're holding it. If you don't catch it, if you do what she was doing, right, and with friendliness, not with it's like martial arts gone wrong. If you don't catch it, it doesn't have a place to land. But to know that we don't have to catch it means that you can toss it back at me.
Are you sure?
Yeah. To know that we don't have to catch it also implies that this person tossed something and I see that they're in need. I don't have to catch that need right now and take care of it, but I'd like to understand it. To be available to that means that I've tended to my own ecosystem enough that I can be present for it. I don't want the tossing, as I'm demonstrating right now, I'm not giving you the message that you should reject other people and other things. Don't catch what's coming at you if it's not yours to catch, but look at the person tossing with great kindness and understanding. You're more likely to have that perspective, preciousness, if you're putting your own life values and nourishment as a priority. You might start thinking it's even magical. Like, how did I do it?
I just heard a great quote that was, what did he say? He said, give people your best without carrying the weight of their choices.
Yes. Yeah. My husband, who you haven't met yet, but I think you have seen him in a Dharma talk before, he's a clinical psychologist. He likes to say to couples, he does couples there, he says, unilaterally, non-contingently, and unconditionally be your best. To which I add, you'll have a lot fewer regrets and less residue, but you'll also realize if the other person wants you at your best. He says it again and again, unilaterally, non-contingently, unconditionally, be your best. Bring your best self to it. And don't small yourself down to the limitations of others. This is one of his other phrases. But then we'll know we don't have the residue of not being at our best and the accumulation of pain that comes from that. I also find that we're capable of being a lot more kind-hearted towards the other when we're operating that way. I will say just a final thing, I don't think it can be only cognitive. Like, I've heard the phrase, I'm going to do it. There has to be also that visceral, physiological, neurological wellspring, the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya Kosha working together to promote that. The more often we see that in ourselves, the more likely our brain chemistry will keep promoting that too. We'll feel a lot better about who we are. None of us appreciates seeing our less than healthy behavior or our resentment be out in the front all the time.
I have to ask the question. A lot of things we've talked about, we've all experienced people seeming oblivious to our needs, in an oblivious sort of way, not a mean way. Or what about just plain outright meanness and bullying that you feel is directed towards you unfairly, I guess would be the best way to say it. Not because you generated this by, having a different habit or saying something inciting this behavior, but just, it's like, where'd that come from?
Right.
Or why?
You experienced that in the high school community, right?
Yeah, I'm experiencing it personally, but
Okay.
Claire does.
So, she does too, yeah. I like to say, lessen your proximity whenever possible, and increase your loving kindness towards that person. That's your own personal practice. I'm not saying you have to go tell them you're doing it, but lessen your proximity whenever possible, because for some people, the system in them that bullies has become antisocial or treads on the sociopathic personality. You don't need to fix that. You weren't born to fix everybody's limitations. No. You don't have the time to do all of that. Lessen your exposure to that while seeing that a bully is formed, not born. There are some biochemical things or neurological, like someone's born with lower vagal tone, and they might not get the care that they need for that, and people misunderstand that this hypersensitive infant has low vagal tone, but they don't like the way it's behaving, so they start controlling or contorting it, and that infant has little available except pushing back, and develops a bully strategy somewhere along the way. I'm saying some of us are born with lower vagal tone. If we had good care and nurturance, we may not develop into the bully. But the bully character is developed through painful circumstances. So our loving kindness towards that person.
On the receiving end.
Yep, so steer clear, lessen your proximity, increase your loving kindness.
Don't catch it or hold it.
Yeah, yeah, it isn't about you.
Whatever they gave.
No, it isn't.
It's them.
But so you could use Eckhart Tolle's phrase, "Here comes a pain body," and really see it as a manifestation of pain, a human manifestation of pain. Yeah. One more question, then I have to manage time.
Just in regards to that, if it's a person, like I have an older woman in my life, and I think she's trying to be helpful with how I'm raising Ronan, for instance, but she comes off as being almost like a bully. Like she's constantly criticizing these things that I don't even see as a problem. So I was going to confront her, and then I thought about it, and I just lessened my time with her. So I'm wondering if confrontation, when do you say, like, because they don't know they're doing that, when do you say, like, that's not serving me, or when do you just lessen your time? Because I feel like it can be inhumane if you just all of a sudden drop them out of your life and you don't explain why.
Yeah. So let's say lessen your proximity, increase your loving kindness. Now when you go speak to somebody, your nervous system is going to be less flinchable and more loving. And the words that we say are only 7% of communication. 50% is body language and 43% is voice tone. So you're going to bring your body language and voice tone to the words and speak simply, briefly. Don't explain too much. Don't go on and on, because you'll start losing your own nervous system capacity. People, once they start over-explaining, are getting into justification and defenses, and the other person's nervous system picks up on that. So lessen exposure, increase loving kindness, and come to body language, voice tone, and every other thing as well as you can. Yeah. Thank you. Let me ask us to close here gracefully with appreciation that we got to be together. And this is, I think, it's going to be our last Dharma talk at this studio, and we'll be picking up at our new studio down the street a month from here. Just about a month, yeah. So it'll be. We opened there on September 1st, and our first Dharma of that weekend is September 4th. So thank you for gracing the space this morning and for welcoming each other to be here. I'm going to say namaste and then take a little break.
Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.